The pharaoh's feast was a spectacle of power and devotion. The ancient Egyptians built their grandest celebrations around food, and by the end of this journey, you will know the exact dishes that defined their world. We will uncover why bread was considered a sacred object and how a thick, potent beer fueled an entire civilization. What single ingredient connected their daily meals to the divine? You are about to discover the hidden recipes that turned a simple harvest into a legendary banquet. What do you believe makes a meal truly unforgettable? At the heart of every celebration, on every table from the humblest home to the pharaoh's palace, sat two sacred pillars. Bread and beer were far more than mere sustenance. They were the very currency of life and the afterlife, direct blessings from the gods. The ancient Egyptians believed the god Osiris first taught humanity to grow grain, and the goddess Hathor was the mother of all brewing. To consume these staples was to partake in the divine. Their daily bread was a world away from the uniform loaves we know today. Most common was a dense, flat loaf made from emmer or barley, a hearty and filling foundation. But for festivals, bakers transformed this humble ingredient into edible art. They crafted loaves in the shapes of animals like cows and fish, or powerful symbols like the ankh, the sign of life. They sweetened these special breads with honey or dates, infusing them with a festive richness that marked the occasion as extraordinary. The beer that accompanied this bread was not a clear, bubbly drink. It was a thick, porridge-like brew, so packed with nutrients it was considered a liquid bread. The process began with baking a special loaf of barley bread, only partially cooked. This malted bread was then crumbled into a vat of water and left to ferment, often with the addition of dates for a fruity sweetness or honey for extra potency. The result was a cloudy, filling beverage that provided essential calories and vitamins to the entire population. This beer was so vital, it was used to pay the laborers who built the pyramids, and no religious offering was complete without it. Without this foundational pair, the grandest feast would have been unimaginable, a mere empty table. But the bread and beer on the table were not just gifts from the gods, they were direct lines of communication. Every successful festival required the favor of the divine patrons who controlled the very source of life. At the head of this celestial pantheon sat Osiris, the great god of agriculture and resurrection. His story was one of death and rebirth, a myth mirrored by the annual cycle of the crops. The most important festivals of the year were tied to the Nile's inundation, an event seen as the tears of Osiris flooding the land and bringing it back to life. When the river receded, leaving behind its rich, black silt, it was as if Osiris himself had blessed the soil, promising a bountiful harvest. For a feast to be truly blessed, the people first had to honor him. Yet no celebration could thrive on solemnity alone. For that, the Egyptians turned to Hathor, the golden goddess of joy, music, and beer. She was the divine life of the party, the mother of the very brew that fueled the festivities. Her presence was invoked with music, dance, and the raising of cups, ensuring that celebration was itself a sacred act. To secure the blessings of these powerful deities, the Egyptians made careful offerings. They would present loaves of the finest, sweetest bread, jars of the strongest beer, and cuts of prime meat upon temple altars. This was not a simple transaction, it was a profound exchange. By offering the gods the best of their own food and drink, the people were directly linking their festival table to the divine will that made it all possible. The abundance on their plates was a direct reflection of the gods' favor. The divine favor earned through offerings was made spectacularly visible during Thebes' grandest event, the Opet Festival. For several weeks each year, the city transformed into a stage for a procession of unparalleled splendor. The statues of the gods Amun, his wife Mut, and their son Khonsu were carefully removed from their shrines within the dark halls of Karnak Temple. Placed upon magnificent ceremonial barks, these divine figures were then carried by teams of priests on a journey down the Avenue of Sphinxes to the Luxor Temple. The air would have been thick with incense and the sound of chanting, a river of humanity flowing alongside their gods. This was not merely a parade. It was the symbolic rejuvenation of the king's power and the god's presence on earth. And such a momentous occasion demanded a feast to match. The state sponsored lavish banquets for the priests, government officials, and even the public. Vast quantities of the sacred staples, bread and beer, were produced in industrial-scale bakeries and breweries, but the menu expanded dramatically for this celebration. Imagine the scent of roasted duck, a prized and fatty meat, wafting through the festival grounds. Sweet honey cakes, a luxurious treat, were distributed alongside the more common loaves. This distribution of food was a masterful act of political and social theater. The quality and quantity of what you received directly reflected your status. High priests and nobles might dine on the finest cuts of meat and the sweetest cakes, while the general public received standard bread and beer. Yet everyone received a share. This act of provision reinforced the pharaoh's divine role as the sole provider for all of Egypt, the intermediary who channeled the god's bounty to his people. The feast was a powerful reminder that the entire social order, from the highest official to the simplest laborer, was sustained by this divine cycle of gift and gratitude. While the Opet Festival celebrated the power of the state, another Theban event turned the social order inward, focusing on the most personal of connections. This was the beautiful festival of the valley, a time when the boundary between the living and the dead became beautifully and temporarily blurred. The statues of the gods would once again journey by bark from Karnak, but this time they crossed the Nile to the west bank, the domain of the setting sun and the eternal city of the dead. This was an invitation for the entire populace to follow, not in mourning, but in celebration. Families gathered their provisions and made the solemn yet hopeful journey across the river to the tombs of their ancestors, carved into the desert cliffs. They came not to grieve, but to dine. The tombs themselves became vibrant gathering places, their courtyards and chapels filled with the sounds of life as families unpacked their offerings for a shared meal with those who had passed on. The food they brought was both simple and deeply symbolic. There were, of course, the foundational staples of life, loaves of bread and jars of beer. But they also included bunches of sharp, pungent onions, a vegetable associated with eternal life because of its many layers. They brought sweet, dark dates for their life-sustaining energy, and often, the most precious offering of all, a portion of roasted meat, perhaps from a goat or a duck. This was not a somber, silent tribute. The family would lay these foods before the tomb's false door, the spiritual portal for the deceased. They believed the Ka, the vital life force or spirit of the ancestor, would emerge to partake of the meal. The Ka did not consume the physical substance of the food, but instead absorbed its life-giving essence, its spiritual nourishment. After allowing time for this sacred consumption, the living family members would then sit down and eat the very same food. They shared the bread, drank the beer, and enjoyed the meat and dates in a joyful, communal feast. In this powerful act, the food became more than sustenance, it was the tangible link between generations. By consuming the essence-strengthening offerings, the deceased remained a vital, remembered part of the family. And by eating the physical remains of the feast, the living affirmed their own place in an unbroken chain of existence. This was a feast that truly defied death itself. A celebration where every bite was a promise that no one is ever truly gone as long as their name is spoken and their table is set. But the most powerful feast of all was reserved for the pharaoh alone, a celebration of his very ability to rule. After 30 years on the throne, a king would undergo the Heb Sed, or Jubilee Festival, a ritual of profound physical and spiritual renewal. The entire nation watched as their ruler proved his enduring strength, and at the heart of this spectacle was a feast of unimaginable scale and symbolism. This was not merely a display of wealth. It was a direct demonstration of the pharaoh's power to command the land's bounty and provide for every soul in Egypt. To fail at this provision was to prove oneself unfit for the crown. The royal kitchens were pushed to their limits, preparing a banquet that spanned the entire kingdom. From the vast royal herds came the most prized meat of all, tender, well-marbled beef, a luxury so potent it was almost exclusively a food for the elite and the gods. Hunters brought gazelle and oryx from the desert, their exotic flavors a testament to the pharaoh's reach beyond the Nile's banks. Tables groaned under the weight of glistening pomegranates, their jewel-like seeds bursting with a tart sweetness rarely tasted by common people, and fine wines, aged to perfection in sealed amphorae. Yet for the pharaoh himself, certain foods held a deeper, magical purpose. In secluded rituals, he would consume specific dishes believed to transfer the very essence of life and strength into his body. How do you think a simple meal could restore a king's divine right to rule? He might eat a special cut of meat from a sacrificial bull, an animal revered for its raw power, or consume a ritual loaf of bread shaped like the ankh, ingesting the symbol of eternal life itself. These were not just meals, they were acts of royal magic, designed to recharge the sovereign's vitality and, by extension, the vitality of the entire nation. And this power flowed outward. Following the king's personal rituals, the state orchestrated massive public feasts. Vast quantities of bread, beer, and meat were distributed to the people, a tangible share in the king's renewed power. In that moment, every full stomach and every raised cup of beer became a silent vow of loyalty. The feast was the ultimate proof of a stable and prosperous kingdom, a living contract between the pharaoh and his people, sealed not with a document, but with the universal language of a shared, abundant meal. The pharaoh's grand jubilee was the ultimate display of royal power, yet the entire kingdom rested on a far more fundamental celebration. While the state orchestrated lavish political feasts, the true heartbeat of Egypt pulsed in its fields, timed to the rise and fall of the Nile. The most vital festivals were those of the harvest, where survival itself was the guest of honor. As the floodwaters receded and the rich, black soil baked under the sun, the entire agricultural year reached its climax. This was the moment all of Egypt had labored for, and it was marked by the festival of Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. The start of the harvest season was not just a date on a calendar, it was a sacred signal, a time to give thanks for the land's generosity before the hard work of reaping began. The air in the villages would have been thick with anticipation and the dusty scent of ripe grain. The central foods of this celebration were the very reason for the festival, the first fruits of the yearly labor. Freshly harvested emmer wheat and barley, their stalks heavy with seed, were not immediately taken to the granaries. Instead, the community gathered for a profound act of gratitude. The very first sheaves of grain, the most perfect stalks from the fields, were carefully cut and set aside. These were not for human consumption, not yet. In a powerful ritual of reciprocity, these first fruits were offered to the gods, a symbolic return of the initial gift of life that Osiris had bestowed. This offering was a promise, a recognition that the earth's bounty was a divine loan, not a human right. Only after the gods had received their sacred portion could the people truly celebrate their own survival. The community then turned the blessed harvest into the staples of life. They baked the season's first festival breads using the new emmer wheat, loaves that tasted of the earth's fresh vitality. They brewed the first beer from the new barley, a brew that carried the essence of the year's success. These were not the elaborate-shaped loaves of state banquets, but honest, hearty food, shared in communal meals that stretched across the village. Every family would partake, eating and drinking together, their shared relief and joy as palpable as the food before them. This harvest feast was the most honest celebration of all. It required no gold or exotic spices. Its power came from the simple, undeniable truth that this food, this bread and this beer, guaranteed the community would live to see another year. In that shared meal, they were not just eating, they were tasting their own future. That communal harvest feast, a taste of the future itself, was only possible because of a single, monumental source. Every morsel of bread, every drop of beer, and every ingredient on the festival table flowed from the Nile River. This was not just a body of water, it was the pulsating heart of the nation, a divine gift that dictated the rhythm of life and celebration. Its annual inundation was the event that defined the Egyptian year. When the river overflowed its banks, it did not bring destruction, but life itself. It carried rich, black silt from the highlands of Africa, spreading this fertile mud across the fields in a layer of natural fertilizer. This single, predictable event transformed the desert into a lush, green garden, creating the abundant harvest that made large-scale feasting a reality. Without this annual renewal, the granaries would have been empty, the breweries silent, and the grandest festival would have been impossible. The river was not just a farmer's tool, it was a sprawling, liquid pantry. Its waters teemed with life, providing a staggering variety of foods that directly shaped the festival menu. The mighty Nile perch, a fish that could grow to the size of a person, was a prized catch. Smaller but plentiful catfish were a common source of protein, often salted and dried to preserve them for large gatherings. Along the marshy banks, hunters would snare ducks and geese, their rich, fatty meat adding a luxurious flavor to special occasions. Even the river's plants were foraged for flavor and beauty. The blue lotus flower, with its sweet, intoxicating scent, was used to infuse wine and decorate banquet halls. Its roots and seeds were also edible, offering a starchy, nutty component to the diet. This incredible biodiversity meant that a festival spread was a vibrant reflection of the river's generosity, a true taste of Egypt itself. But the Nile's role went even deeper than supplying ingredients. Its water was considered sacred, a life-giving force that was essential in the preparation of the two most important festival staples. The same water that flooded the fields was used to mix the dough for the sacred bread. It was the very water used to mash the grains and ferment the thick, nutritious beer. When a priest poured a libation of beer as an offering to a god, he was, in essence, returning a purified form of the Nile's own gift. To cook with Nile water, or to brew with it, was to infuse the food with the essence of the land's vitality. Every loaf of bread and every jar of beer served at a festival was therefore a direct embodiment of the river's power. Can you taste the difference between water and life itself? For the ancient Egyptians, that distinction did not exist. The water in their cup was the same water that fed their crops, sustained their fish, and connected their world from the pharaoh's golden goblet to the humblest clay bowl in a worker's home. This made every shared meal, from the grand state banquet to the family gathering in a tomb courtyard, a ritual of thanksgiving to the great river that made it all possible. Yet for all the power of bread and beer, the most potent symbol of a truly grand festival was the presence of meat. In a land where most protein came from fish or fowl, a butchered animal represented an immense investment and a profound sacrifice. This was not everyday food. It was the centerpiece of divine offerings and royal feasts, a luxury that separated the elite table from the common meal. The most prestigious meat of all was beef, particularly from the fatty, well-fed ox. A whole roasted bull was the ultimate display of a pharaoh's wealth and his direct connection to the gods, as the bull was sacred to deities like Ptah and Apis. More commonly available, though still a mark of status, were sheep and goats. Their meat was rich and flavorful, often stewed for hours in large clay pots with leeks and garlic until it was falling from the bone. For the most exclusive royal banquets, the menu expanded beyond the farmyard. Hunters provided exotic game like the slender gazelle and the powerful oryx. Their lean, dark meat a taste of the untamed desert, and a testament to the king's dominion over all of Egypt. But how did a simple animal transform into a sacred feast? The process began not in the kitchen, but at the temple altar. The sacrifice was the crucial first step. A priest would select a perfect, unblemished animal, perhaps a young goat or a fattened goose. In a solemn ritual, the animal was consecrated to a specific god, its life offered in exchange for divine favor. This was not a wasteful act, it was a transaction of immense spiritual significance. The god would receive the animal's life force, its spiritual essence, while the physical meat was then distributed to the priests and, during major festivals, to the people. This is how a festival became a shared sacred meal. The same animal that had been offered to Hathor or Ammon was now butchered and cooked. It might be spit roasted whole over a roaring open fire, the fat crackling and sizzling, filling the air with an irresistible aroma that signaled celebration. Or it could be chopped and added to a communal stew, bubbling away in a massive pot that fed an entire neighborhood. When you received your portion of this meat, you were not just eating protein, you were consuming a substance that had been touched by the divine. That single, flavorful bite connected you directly to the gods, a tangible share in the sacrifice that ensured their continued blessing. In that moment, the luxury of meat became something far greater, a physical bond between heaven and earth, consumed in joyous, communal gratitude. While the wealthy savored their beef and gazelle, the true taste of celebration for most Egyptians swam in the river and flew in the marshes. For the common family, a festival was defined not by a rare cut of red meat, but by the generous bounty of fowl and fish. These were the democratic delicacies, foods that could be caught by anyone with a net or a throw stick, making them central to feasts at every level of society. Along the Nile's lush banks, Egyptians maintained flocks of domesticated ducks and geese, birds specifically fattened for special occasions. The humble pigeon, nesting in the eaves of mud-brick houses, was also a common and ready source of meat. For a festival meal, these birds were often simply prepared to highlight their rich, natural flavors. A plump duck might be roasted whole over an open fire, its skin crisping and its fat dripping onto the coals with a satisfying hiss. Alternatively, it could be boiled in a large pot with leeks and celery, creating a savory broth that was a meal in itself. The result was a tender, flavorful dish that turned a simple family gathering into a marked occasion. From the river itself came an even greater variety. The Nile was a living larder, teeming with fish like the abundant tilapia and the formidable catfish. To preserve this bounty for large festivals or for offerings, the Egyptians became masters of preservation. They would gut the fish, coat them in salt, and lay them out on hot sand to dry in the relentless sun. This process created a durable, protein-rich food that could be stored for months, ready to be rehydrated in a stew or even eaten as a handy, salty snack during a day-long celebration. For immediate feasting, nothing beat a freshly caught fish, scaled and grilled over hot coals right on the riverbank, its flaky flesh a direct gift from the water. This importance is forever captured on the walls of tombs. Why would an artist immortalize a simple fish or a cluster of pigeons? These paintings were not mere decoration, they were a magical menu for eternity. The Egyptians believed these images could be activated by ritual, providing the deceased with a perpetual supply of their favorite festive foods in the afterlife. A nobleman would be shown hunting ducks in the marshes, not just as a sport, but as a promise that he would always have the means to feast. A family scene would depict a table piled high with roasted waterfowl and platters of dried fish, ensuring the departed would never know hunger. In this way, the duck on a farmer's spit and the tilapia in a worker's stew were elevated to sacred status. They were the foods of shared joy, the accessible luxuries that connected a humble household celebration to the eternal banquet of the gods. After the savory richness of roasted duck and stewed meat came a taste of pure, unadulterated luxury. The sweet course in ancient Egypt was not an afterthought, it was a deliberate finale of divine indulgence, a celebration of the land's most precious gifts. The most fundamental of these gifts were the fruits that grew in abundance along the Nile. Dates, with their deep caramel sweetness, were a staple energy source, eaten fresh or dried for year-round use. Figs, bursting with jammy seeds, and clusters of sun-warmed grapes provided a fresh, juicy counterpoint to the hearty breads. For the most elite feasts, the pomegranate reigned supreme. To crack open its tough hide and reveal a cache of glistening, ruby seeds was to unveil a treasure. A fruit so beautiful and complex, it became a powerful symbol of life and prosperity. But the true magic of Egyptian sweets came from a single, golden ingredient. Honey was the only concentrated sweetener they possessed, a lavish product of carefully tended hives. It was more valuable than most spices, a true luxury item reserved for the most important occasions. Temple and palace kitchens used this liquid gold to create delicacies like honey cakes, which were likely dense, sweetened loaves or pastries glazed with honey, and perhaps studded with nuts. They also made a simple but irresistible confection by crushing dates into a thick paste, mixing in honey and chopped nuts, and forming them into rich, chewy bars. This was perhaps one of the world's earliest energy bars, but for the Egyptians, it was a dessert fit for a god. Why would a civilization offer its most expensive foods to deities who could not physically eat them? The answer lies in the essence of the offering itself. Presenting a jar of the finest honey or a platter of perfect dates was the ultimate act of devotion. It was a way of saying, we are giving you not just food, but the very essence of sweetness, the pinnacle of our land's pleasure. when these divine offerings were later distributed and consumed by the priests and the elite during a festival, that sweetness became a shared blessing. Every bite of a honey cake or a date bar was a taste of divine favor, a tangible piece of a covenant between the people and their gods. In that moment, dessert was far more than a treat. It was the sweet proof that life itself was a gift worth celebrating. That same divine sweetness was often balanced by a profound richness, a creaminess that elevated a simple meal into a feast. Beyond the honey and the fruit, the ancient Egyptian kitchen held another category of luxury ingredients: dairy products and precious oils. Milk was not a common daily drink for most adults, but it was a vital resource, primarily from cows, though also from goats and sheep. In a world without refrigeration, fresh milk would spoil quickly, so the Egyptians became masters of preservation through fermentation and transformation. They likely made a simple, yogurt-like fermented milk, a tangy and nutritious food that could last longer. But their most ingenious dairy invention was cheese. Archaeologists have found evidence of cheese making in Egyptian potsherds dating back thousands of years. They would have curdled the milk, perhaps using enzymes from fig sap or the stomach lining of a young animal, then strained the curds to create a salty, crumbly cheese. This early cheese could be stored, providing a concentrated source of fat and protein that was perfect for enriching festival dishes or for long journeys. For the elite, there was an even more refined product. They knew how to churn milk into butter, and then gently heat that butter to clarify it, creating a substance remarkably similar to the ghee used in Indian cooking today. This clarified butter had a high smoke point and a long shelf life, making it ideal for sautéing vegetables or for basting a prized cut of meat for a royal banquet. Its rich, nutty flavor would have been a clear marker of a truly special occasion. The role of fats extended far beyond dairy. Egyptian cooks had a whole pantry of oils at their disposal, each extracted from local plants and seeds. They pressed linseed from flax plants to create linseed oil, a robust oil that could be used in cooking or even in lamp fuel. They cultivated sesame for its seeds, crushing them to yield a fragrant sesame oil that would have added a wonderful, toasty note to a dish. They even used oil from the castor bean, a plant that is toxic if not processed correctly, demonstrating their advanced knowledge of how to handle and detoxify ingredients. These oils were the foundation of cooking, used for frying fish, dressing vegetables, and moistening bread doughs. Imagine a festival loaf of bread, not just baked, but brushed with fragrant sesame oil before baking, giving it a golden, flavorful crust. Or consider a stew made for a village celebration, its humble vegetables transformed by a spoonful of precious linseed oil, adding a layer of unctuous richness that was absent from the daily pot. This was the true power of dairy and oils. They did not just fill the stomach, they delighted the senses. A dab of creamy cheese on a piece of bread, a dish glistening with savory fat, these were the textures and flavors that shouted celebration. In a world where most meals were functional, these ingredients provided the luxurious mouthfeel and deep, satisfying flavors that turned sustenance into an experience, making every festival dish a memorable gift from a generous land. The rich, savory smoke rising from a festival roast was never just about the meat itself. It was the scent of cumin and coriander, toasted and crushed, rising to greet the gods. The ancient Egyptian kitchen was a fragrant world, a place where the very air was seasoned with herbs and spices that transformed simple ingredients into a celebration of the senses. While we might associate exotic spices with later empires, the Egyptians were master flavor architects, using a vibrant palette of local and imported aromatics to define their most important meals. Coriander was a staple, its citrusy, slightly sweet seeds found in tombs, destined to flavor the afterlife. Cumin, with its warm, earthy depth, was used to rub onto meats before roasting. Dill and fenugreek, with their distinct aromas, were pounded into pastes for marinades. Fresh, bright mint was chopped and mixed into salads or used to garnish dishes, offering a burst of coolness. For the most elite tables, there was even cinnamon, a precious bark that had to travel vast trade routes from the distant land of Punt, making it a true symbol of royal wealth and global connection. These were not mere garnishes, they were essential components of the feast's magic. A leg of goat destined for a temple offering would be slathered in a thick paste of garlic, cumin, and coriander, the spices penetrating the meat and creating a crust of incredible flavor when it hit the fire. Bakers would mix whole dill seeds or ground fenugreek directly into their bread doughs, so that every bite of the sacred loaf carried an extra dimension of taste. The influence of these aromatics even flowed into the drinks. Brewers would infuse their beer with juniper berries or dates steeped with cinnamon, creating spiced, complex brews. Winemakers experimented with infusing their wines with resin from terebinth trees or with handfuls of mint and coriander leaves, crafting flavored wines that were unlike anything we know today. This mastery of flavor was surprisingly democratic. While cinnamon was a luxury for the elite, herbs like dill, mint, and coriander could be grown in any kitchen garden or in pots on a sunny windowsill. This meant that even a modest family's festival meal, a simple stew of lentils or a roasted fish, could be lifted from the ordinary with a handful of fresh herbs. The aroma of mint and coriander simmering in a pot was a universal signal of a special occasion, a scent that promised a meal worthy of the gods and a moment of shared joy. That thick, nutritious beer was far from a single, monolithic drink. The ancient Egyptians, masters of their craft, developed a whole spectrum of brews, each with its own purpose and place at the festival table. The most common variety was a standard, everyday beer known as henket. This was the liquid bread we discussed, a cloudy, porridge-like substance that was a dietary staple. But for celebrations, brewers created something special. They produced stronger, more potent versions, often by increasing the grain content or allowing for a longer fermentation. The most prized festival beers were those infused with dates. Adding mashed dates or date syrup during the brewing process did more than just sweeten the brew. It provided extra sugars for the yeast to consume, resulting in a significantly higher alcohol content and a rich, fruity complexity that transformed the experience from mere sustenance to pure celebration. This was not just beer, it was a deliberate luxury, a crafted indulgence for the gods and their people. The social and religious significance of henket was woven into the very fabric of society. It was a form of currency, used to pay the laborers who built the pyramids and the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. A worker's daily ration could be several loaves of bread and several jars of this beer, a direct payment that fueled the construction of a civilization. In religion, no temple offering was complete without it. Jars of the finest festival beer were presented to gods like Hathor and Osiris, a libation that symbolized life, joy, and the fruitfulness of the land. The evidence for this sophisticated brewery is etched in stone and buried in the earth. Tomb scenes from the Old Kingdom onward show the entire brewing process in vivid detail. We see figures mashing the partially baked malted bread in large vats, straining the thick liquid into fermentation jars, and finally sealing those jars with clay stoppers. These were not small-scale operations. Archaeological finds at sites like the workers' village at Deir el-Medina and the city of Amarna reveal large, state-run breweries with rows of ceramic vats set into plastered benches. These were the industrial-scale production facilities of their day, capable of brewing the thousands of liters needed for a single public festival like the Opet. The scale was staggering, a logistical marvel dedicated to ensuring that every participant, from the high priest to the common citizen, could raise a cup in shared jubilation. That simple clay jar of beer, therefore, was a microcosm of Egyptian society, holding within it the sweat of the laborer, the skill of the brewer, the favor of the gods, and the unifying joy of a community in celebration. Within the smoky warmth of the bakery, dough was being shaped into prayers. For a festival, the baker's work transcended mere nourishment, his hands crafting sacred symbols meant to be consumed. While the daily loaf was a simple, hearty flatbread, a celebratory feast demanded an entire menagerie of edible art. He would pinch and pull emmer wheat dough into the form of a fertile cow, a tribute to the goddess Hathor. He might sculpt a detailed fish, its scales etched with a knife, an invocation of the Nile's endless bounty. Some loaves were shaped like the powerful ankh, the key of life itself, so that by eating it, you were literally taking life into your body. Other times, the baker created human figures, perhaps representing the god Osiris. Their doughy forms a direct connection to the divine. Each shape carried a specific intention, a magical purpose meant to transfer the symbol's power to the person who ate it. A loaf shaped like a hippopotamus, the animal of the protective goddess Taweret, might be given to a pregnant woman to ensure a safe delivery. The variety was staggering, a tangible expression of the community's hopes and devotion. The ingredients themselves were chosen for their significance. The primary flour came from emmer wheat, a hardy ancient grain, or from barley. But for these special loaves, the baker would enrich the dough with the land's most precious treasures. He would knead in handfuls of sweet, sticky dates or drizzle in golden honey, transforming the bread from a staple into a luxury. The resulting loaf was denser, sweeter, and bore the distinct fragrance of celebration. The sheer volume required for a major feast like the Opet meant that the communal ovens, often attached to temples or large estates, worked relentlessly for days. The air would be thick with the smell of roasting grain and hot clay as teams of bakers shaped, proofed, and baked thousands of these symbolic loaves. Can you hear the quiet focus in a room where food is being prepared not just for a crowd, but for the gods? This was a sacred production line, where every fish-shaped roll and every cow-shaped bun was a small, edible monument to the forces that sustained their world. While beer was the common drink of the people, wine was the sacred nectar of the gods and the elite. This was a luxury reserved for the most important festivals and the highest echelons of society, a shimmering red or pale gold liquid that spoke of wealth and divine connection. The finest vineyards thrived in the lush, green expanses of the Nile Delta, where the soil was perfect for nurturing grapes, with additional outposts of viticulture flourishing in remote desert oases. The winemaking process was a careful, sacred craft. Workers would harvest the ripe grape clusters by hand, carrying them in baskets to a wide, shallow vat. There, a team of men would stomp the fruit, their bare feet crushing the grapes to release the sweet juice, which would flow through a channel into a waiting fermentation jar. The jar was then sealed with a clay stopper, often marked with the vineyard's name, the vintage year, and even the name of the chief vintner, a level of record-keeping that shows us how seriously they took this art. This was not just agriculture, it was alchemy, transforming humble fruit into a substance worthy of the gods. The resulting wine was deeply tied to Osiris, who was not only a god of grain, but also of vegetation and resurrection. Just as he brought life from death, the grapevine emerged from a dormant state to bear fruit, and its juice underwent a magical transformation into wine. Because of this, wine became a powerful symbol of his blood and his life-giving power. It was a standard offering in temples, poured out as a libation to honor the gods, and placed in tombs to sustain the deceased spirit in the afterlife. Archaeologists have found amphorae in royal tombs with labels detailing their contents, specifying red wine or the rarer, more prized white wine. At a royal jubilee or a major religious festival, the presence of wine was a clear statement. When the pharaoh raised a golden cup of wine, he was not just displaying his wealth, he was performing a sacred act. He was channeling the essence of Osiris, drinking in the god's power of renewal, and demonstrating his own divine right to rule. For the elite guests at such a feast, to be served wine was to be granted a share in that divine favor, a taste of a celestial celebration happening right here on earth. The very act of sitting down to a festival meal instantly revealed your place in the world. For the vast majority of Egyptians, celebration meant gathering on a simple woven mat spread over a packed earth floor or a courtyard. There were no individual plates. Instead, a large, round loaf of bread served as both food and edible platter. Stews of lentils or fish were poured directly onto this bread, and everyone ate with their hands from the common, softening loaf, a practice that was both practical and deeply communal. This was a feast of shared intimacy, where the food itself was the only centerpiece. But step into the home of a noble or the palace of a high official, and the scene transformed into a carefully choreographed display of status. Here, guests did not sit on the ground. They reclined on low, cushioned chairs or stools, a posture that immediately set them apart. Individual low tables were placed before them, often inlaid with precious woods or ivory. Servants moved silently through the room, presenting platters of food and keeping precious alabaster cups filled with wine or beer. This was not just a meal, it was a performance of wealth and power. Before any food could be touched, however, a universal ritual of purity took place. A servant would approach each guest, pouring scented water over their hands from an elegant ewer into a matching basin. This was not merely about hygiene, it was a symbolic act of cleansing, of preparing oneself physically and spiritually to receive the gifts of the gods and the land. The same ritual was repeated after the meal, washing away the remnants of the feast and completing the sacred cycle of consumption. The social hierarchy was then reinforced by the seating arrangement itself. The most honored guest, perhaps a royal vizier or a high priest, would be seated closest to the host, who occupied the central position. As you moved further from the host, your status diminished. This geography of power directly determined the quality of your meal. The guest of honor would be served the finest cuts of meat, the juiciest piece of roast duck, or a prime slice of beef. Their cup would be filled with the oldest, most potent wine. A guest seated at the far end of the room, however, might receive a tougher cut of meat or a smaller portion of the spiced stew, and their drink would likely be the common, everyday beer. Even in the midst of joyous celebration, the social order was constantly being served and consumed, a quiet reminder that every feast was also a map of the kingdom itself. Behind that single honey cake on a noble's plate stood a hidden army of laborers. Feeding a city during the Opet Festival was a monumental feat of logistics, a silent, bustling operation that rivaled the public spectacle in its complexity. Temple and palace kitchens transformed into culinary factories, manned by a regiment of bakers, brewers, and butchers, all working in a synchronized, fragrant chaos. The scale was almost impossible to comprehend. To produce the thousands of loaves of bread and hundreds of jars of beer needed, the state activated its entire economic machine. The grain did not simply appear. It was sourced from vast royal estates up and down the Nile, harvested months in advance, and stored in massive, state-controlled granaries. These towering mud brick silos were the nation's strategic reserves, their contents carefully measured and released for the festival by scribes wielding meticulous inventories. The same system applied to meat. Temple herds, dedicated to specific gods, provided a steady supply of cattle, goats, and sheep. For a major feast, these sacred animals were selected from the herd, their slaughter a religious act that preceded their journey to the butcher's block. Imagine the sheer volume of ingredients flowing into Thebes, a river of grain, dates, and livestock converging on the temple district to be transformed into a feast. The heart of this operation was the brewery and bakery complex. Here, in long halls filled with the heat of ovens and the sour scent of fermentation, teams worked around the clock. Dozens of large ceramic vats, each taller than a person, were set into plastered benches. In these vats, the sacred beer was mashed and left to ferment, a small ocean of festival brew. Nearby, bakers kneaded enormous mounds of dough in troughs, their hands shaping not just loaves but the very substance of the celebration. They used massive, beehive-shaped clay ovens, firing them to incredible temperatures to bake hundreds of loaves at a time. But how did all this food reach the masses? The distribution was a masterpiece of social engineering. Priests and officials oversaw the process, directing teams of servants and laborers. Jars of beer and baskets of bread were carried out from the temple kitchens to distribution points along the procession route. The elite received their portions directly, a curated selection of the finest foods. For the public, the system was more generalized but no less vital. People likely gathered in designated areas, where standard rations of bread and beer were handed out, a tangible share in the pharaoh's divine provision. This entire system, from the granary scribe to the server with a basket of bread, was a living testament to Egyptian power. It proved the state could not only command the gods' favor, but could also mobilize the entire land to turn that favor into a feast for thousands. That bustling temple kitchen, with its ovens roaring and vats bubbling, had a single, sacred destination. Every carefully crafted loaf of bread and every jar of potent beer was first and foremost destined for the temple's inner sanctum, the home of the god. At the core of daily life in ancient Egypt was a ritual known as the daily offering, a ceremony of profound intimacy where the priest served a meal to the divine statue itself. This was not a symbolic gesture. It was treated with the utmost seriousness, as if the deity were a living, breathing resident of the temple. The ritual followed a strict sequence, almost like serving a revered monarch. Priests, purified and dressed in pristine white linen, would enter the Holy of Holies, the darkened chamber where the god's statue resided. They would awaken the deity with hymns, cleanse the statue with water, dress it in fresh linens and jewelry, and anoint it with precious oils. Then came the main event, the presentation of the meal. They would lay out a lavish spread before the statue, a divine banquet featuring platters of the finest bread, cuts of prime roasted meat, bowls of sweet fruits like dates and pomegranates, jars of beer and wine, and even bouquets of fragrant flowers. The priests would then retreat, leaving the god in peace to consume the meal. But how does a stone or wooden statue eat? The Egyptians believed the god did not consume the physical substance of the food, but rather its life-giving essence, its spiritual energy, which they called the ka. The statue, as a vessel for the god's spirit, would absorb this sustaining essence, nourishing its power and ensuring its continued presence and favor for the entire nation. This act was the engine of the universe, a daily renewal of the cosmic order. After a suitable time for this spiritual consumption, the priests would return to the sanctuary. The food, now physically untouched but spiritually depleted, underwent a crucial transformation. This was the moment of the reversion of offerings. The same bread, meat, and beer that had just sustained a god were now removed from the altar. But this food was far from wasted. It became the foundation of the entire temple economy. This divine surplus was systematically distributed, forming a sacred food chain. The highest-ranking priests received the choicest portions, the very cuts of beef and loaves of honey-sweetened bread that had sat before the god. Lower-level priests, scribes, and temple artisans would receive the next tier of offerings, perhaps the standard bread, beer, and portions of fowl. This system provided a steady, high-quality diet for the temple staff, effectively paying them with food that had been blessed by the gods themselves. During a major festival, the scale of these offerings multiplied exponentially, and the reversion could extend beyond the temple walls. Portions of the festival offerings might be distributed to the public, creating a powerful, tangible link between the people's piety and their dinner. For a lucky citizen, receiving a piece of bread from the Opet Festival offerings was not just a free meal. It was a direct taste of the god's own table, a physical fragment of divine favor. This cycle turned the temple into a vast, divinely provisioned pantry, where every ritual meal strengthened the gods, supported the state, and fed the people, weaving a single, unbroken thread from the altar in the dark sanctuary to the loaf of bread in a worker's home. For the farmer who spent his days bent over in the sun-baked fields, a festival was not about exotic gazelle meat or cinnamon-spiced wine. His celebration was built from the earth he worked, a humble feast that tasted of hard-won survival and shared joy. While the pharaoh's banquets showcased power, the commoner's festival was a testament to resilience and community. The centerpiece of his table was always the bread and beer he and his family produced themselves. This was not the intricately shaped loaf from a temple bakery, but a hearty, dense round of emmer wheat, baked in a simple clay oven behind the house. The beer was a homebrew, fermented in a large pot and shared from common jars. It was thick, filling, and familiar, the very taste of their daily labor transformed into a tool for celebration. To this foundation, they added the bounty they could easily gather: a freshly caught Nile catfish, scaled and grilled over an open fire, provided a welcome change from the dried and salted fish eaten most days. From their small household plot came bunches of sharp, pungent onions and lentils, which would be simmered for hours into a thick, comforting stew. If the family was fortunate, they might sacrifice one of their own domesticated ducks or a few pigeons, roasting the small birds to yield a few precious bites of rich, savory meat for everyone. The location of this feast was just as important as the food. This was not a grand palace hall, but a home's courtyard, a shaded area beneath a sycamore fig tree, or even the forecourt of a family tomb during the beautiful festival of the valley. Families and neighbors would gather on woven mats, sharing food directly from common pots, using the bread itself as both plate and utensil. The air would be filled with laughter, storytelling, and the shared relief of a break from relentless labor. These gatherings were not just about eating, they were a vital reaffirmation of the bonds that held their small world together. A successful harvest festival was a collective sigh of relief, a confirmation that their community would thrive for another year. A religious holiday was a chance to participate in the larger cosmic drama, connecting their humble meal to the offerings being made in the distant, magnificent temples. In these moments, the simple act of sharing a stew and a jar of beer under the stars was as powerful as any state banquet, for it celebrated the most enduring truth of all, that a life of toil was made meaningful by the joy found in each other's company. The silent tombs of the nobles hold the most direct evidence of their festive tables. Archaeologists have discovered actual, physical food left as eternal provisions for the deceased. In the dry, sealed darkness of burial chambers, they have found desiccated loaves of bread, still holding their shape after thousands of years. These are not mere crumbs, but complete, round loaves, sometimes even resting in the very baskets they were carried in. Jars have been found with the remains of honey, now crystallized but still sweetly fragrant, and ceramic containers still hold the desiccated bones of dried fish and joints of meat. These are the original festival supplies, placed there so the ka of the noble would never hunger, and they give us a tangible, unfiltered look at the very ingredients they valued most. The walls of these tombs act as a detailed menu, painted and carved in brilliant, lasting color. They show scenes of elaborate banquets, with guests seated before heaving offering tables. These tables are depicted piled high with stacks of conical bread loaves, trussed ducks ready for roasting, and cuts of beef from the leg or the head. You can see baskets overflowing with figs and dates, and ornate jars that likely held wine or fine beer. One famous scene might show a servant presenting a whole roasted gazelle to the tomb owner, while another carries a platter of fruits. These images were not just decorative, they were functional magic, intended to provide a perpetual feast for the dead. How can we be sure these foods were real and not just artistic fantasy? Modern science provides the final, confirming chapter. Researchers now use chemical analysis on the very pottery from these tombs and from ancient kitchen sites. By studying the residue absorbed into the ceramic fabric of a beer jar, they can detect the telltale chemical fingerprints of barley and yeast. A wine amphora might reveal traces of tartaric acid, confirming the presence of grapes. Even from a simple cooking pot, scientists can identify lipids, the fats from meat and oils, telling us that a specific vessel once held a stew of goat or beef. This residue analysis is like reading a ghost menu, a scientific testament to the celebratory meals that were cooked, served, and enjoyed in the distant past. These three lines of evidence, the physical food, the painted menus, and the chemical traces, all converge to tell the same story, proving that the vibrant festival tables we have been exploring were not just a historical idea, but a delicious, tangible reality. The grandest feast could not happen if the food spoiled before the guests arrived. Ancient Egyptian ingenuity in preservation was the invisible force that turned a single harvest into a year-round calendar of celebrations. They mastered the desert itself, using the relentless sun as a giant, natural dehydrator. For the fish teeming in the Nile, this meant a simple yet brilliant process. Workers would gut freshly caught tilapia or catfish, coat them liberally in precious salt, and lay them out on mats of woven reeds to bake on the hot sand. The salt drew out moisture while inhibiting bacteria, and the sun did the rest, transforming the succulent flesh into a durable, protein-rich slab that could be stored for months. This same technique applied to meat. Strips of duck, goose, or even precious beef were salted and dried, creating a kind of ancient jerky that could be rehydrated in a stew or eaten as a portable snack during a long festival. For an even deeper flavor and longer shelf life, they also used smoking. Meat and fish would be hung over smoldering fires of specific woods, the aromatic smoke infusing the food with a rich taste, while the heat and chemicals from the smoke acted as a powerful preservative. Imagine the scent of smoking duck wafting from a temple workshop, a promise of future feasts held in reserve. Fruits required a gentler touch. The abundant dates and figs were simply spread out in the shade to dry slowly. This process concentrated their natural sugars, making them even sweeter and preventing fermentation or mold. A dried date became a compact energy source, a sweet treat that could be packed into baskets and stored in cool, dark storerooms for years, ready to be used in honey cakes or eaten as is during a festival. But the most crucial preservation project of all involved the kingdom's foundational staple, grain. The vast harvests of emmer and barley were not left vulnerable. They were poured into massive, state-controlled silos, towering mud brick structures designed like giant, sealed jars. These silos had narrow openings at the top for filling and were plastered smooth inside and out to create a barrier against moisture and pests. Once full, the opening was sealed with a clay cap, effectively creating an anaerobic environment where insects could not thrive and the grain could sleep, safely preserved for the many months until the next harvest. This was the true genius of their system, a way of bottling time itself. Why was this deep knowledge of preservation so vital? It was the absolute prerequisite for power and piety. A pharaoh could not command the gods' favor with a stale loaf. The state's ability to host a festival like the Opet, which occurred months after the harvest, depended entirely on these preserved surpluses. The smoked duck, the salted fish, the dried dates, and the sleeping grain in the silos were not just food. They were the strategic reserves of a civilization. They allowed the temple breweries to run year-round and the bakeries to fire up their ovens on demand. This created a buffer against scarcity, ensuring that even in the lean months before the next inundation, the state had the means to stage a spectacle of divine abundance. The very continuity of their culture, the ability to honor the gods and unite the people in celebration according to a sacred calendar, was built upon the quiet, patient work of salting, drying, and sealing. Every bite of festival bread was made possible by the foresight of a system that knew how to make the bounty of one season last for all. That same sacred bread and beer was a world of flavor slowly expanding with every foreign ship that docked on the Nile. Egypt's festival tables were not isolated creations, but vibrant tapestries woven with threads from across the ancient world. The kingdom's immense wealth and power opened vast trade networks, bringing distant lands and their unique foods directly to the Egyptian elite. From the verdant highlands of the Near East came trees bearing strange new fruits. The pomegranate arrived, a tough, leathery-skinned orb that, when cracked open, revealed a stunning cache of glistening, ruby-red seeds. This was not just a fruit. It was a treasure chest of tart, juicy flavor, and a powerful symbol of life and resurrection because of its abundant seeds. Alongside it came the apricot, a soft, golden fruit with a velvety skin and a sweet, honeyed flesh that was unlike anything native to the Nile Valley. These were not mere snacks, they were sensations. Possessing such fruits instantly marked you as a person of immense status, someone with the means to acquire miracles from beyond the desert. But the most legendary source of flavor lay even further south, in the mysterious, almost mythical land of Punt. Reaching Punt required a perilous sea voyage down the Red Sea, a state-sponsored expedition so significant it was recorded on temple walls. The prize was cinnamon, a fragrant bark that filled the air with its warm, sweet, and woody aroma. This single spice became the ultimate luxury, a scent that whispered of pharaonic power and global reach. So how did these exotic treasures make the leap from rare import to festival delicacy? They were seamlessly woven into the existing language of luxury. A noble's feast might now feature a platter of glistening pomegranate seeds scattered over roasted duck, their burst of acidity cutting through the rich fat. Honey cakes, already a delight, could be perfumed with a pinch of precious cinnamon, transforming them from a simple sweet into an aromatic experience fit for a god. The very act of serving these foods was a statement. When a pharaoh offered pomegranates and cinnamon-infused wine to Ammon during the Opet Festival, he was doing more than honoring the god. He was displaying Egypt's dominion over distant lands, proving that the entire known world contributed to its abundance. The festival table became a map of empire, a delicious display of connectivity where every bite of an apricot or every sip of spiced wine was a taste of Egypt's far-reaching power. The journey of their food did not end with the last pharaoh. Those same staples that graced the tables of Thebes and Memphis embarked on a journey across centuries, their flavors echoing through the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern kitchens we know today. Think of the thick, porridge-like beer that fueled pyramid builders, a direct ancestor to the rustic, unfiltered brews still enjoyed in some parts of the region. The Egyptians' mastery of baking, their ovens producing thousands of loaves for a single festival, established a culinary tradition where bread remains the sacred center of every meal. That dense, round loaf used as an edible plate evolved into the pita and flatbreads found from Greece to Iraq, a universal symbol of hospitality and shared sustenance. Even our modern love for roasted and grilled meats, seasoned with cumin and coriander, finds its roots in the temple kitchens where priests rubbed ducks and goats with those very spices before offering them to the gods. The connection is not merely theoretical. Take the humble fava bean, a staple known today as full medames. This simple, hearty dish of mashed fava beans, slow-cooked with oil and garlic, was almost certainly known to the ancient Egyptians. Archaeologists have found evidence of fava beans in storage jars from that era, and its enduring popularity in Egypt suggests a continuous thread linking the modern breakfast table to a worker's meal thousands of years ago. Then there is taamia, the Egyptian version of falafel. While its modern form uses fava beans, its concept, a spiced, deep-fried patty made from pulses, is a culinary idea with ancient roots, a way to create a flavorful, protein-rich food from simple, stored ingredients. This was the genius of their culinary philosophy, viewing food not just as fuel, but as a sacred gift. In every modern celebration where bread is broken and shared, where a communal meal marks a holy day or a family gathering, we are participating in a tradition they perfected. The legacy of the Egyptian feast is not found in a dusty recipe book, but in the very act of coming together, of transforming the earth's bounty into a moment of connection and gratitude. From the humblest barley loaf to the pharaoh's most extravagant banquet, food was the undeniable heartbeat of ancient Egyptian festivals. It was the golden thread that wove their entire world together, connecting the solemn silence of a temple offering to the joyous laughter in a family courtyard. These were not separate events, but different verses of the same sacred song. Every shared meal, from the state-sponsored feast to the harvest celebration, reinforced a profound truth, that community, faith, and survival were all sustained by the same divine bounty. The revelries on the Nile offer us a timeless lesson, reminding us that gathering to break bread has always been one of humanity's most powerful rituals. It is how we connect with the divine, affirm our bonds with each other, and honor the long chain of ancestors who came before us. Their festivals live on in our own celebrations, in the comfort of a family dinner, and the joy of a holiday table. So we leave you with one final question to ponder. If you could step back in time and join one of these legendary feasts, what ancient Egyptian dish would you most want to taste? Would it be the thick, nourishing festival beer, a honey cake glistening under the sun, or a slice of roast duck seasoned with cumin and coriander? Let us know your choice in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more journeys into the incredible mysteries of the past.